Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about the different cultivars of blueberries. We'll go into planting, mulching, weeding, watering, fertilizing, a little bit about pollination. I'll quickly talk about a couple of diseases, some insects, and then we'll get into pruning, which is what most people have a little trouble with. And actually, when we get done, you'll find out that pruning is really pretty simple in blueberries. Okay, I'm sure most of you grow your blueberries here because you want to eat them. You love the taste of them. They are great. And those of you that have more than one blueberry plant at home or more than one type realize how different every blueberry tastes. It is amazing. You think you're eating a blueberry is a blueberry, but boy, if you start getting the different varieties, it is amazing how different they all taste. Some people only grow them for an ornamental plant. They really do enhance our landscape. They're very beautiful plants. During the summer, those nice bright green leaves, and in the fall, depending on what variety you have nice red branches or yellow branches, so good plant to have around home. Okay, if you have a very healthy plant and you do everything right and your plant is mature, which a mature plant is somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, you should get about 10 to 12 inches of new growth every summer, new stems that come out and grow, about that much if you're doing everything right. Also, you should get between 10 and 15 pounds of blueberries per bush, and that is a lot of blueberries. So 2 or 3 bushes will feed a family, no problem, with enough to save for wintertime too. Okay, we're very, very fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest that we are able to grow what we call high bush blueberries. This is one of the larger types of blueberries. Blueberries come in 3 categories: early, mid, and late season varieties. And the picture up here shows a list of some of the varieties. And I could tell you some of my favorites, but unless you taste them yourself, you may not, your taste and my taste are probably a little bit different. So if you want to plant some new blueberries and you're not sure what variety you want, I would suggest you go to a U-Pick farm, taste a few of the varieties, and you know exactly what you want. Then you can go buy them and go home and have just the right type of blueberries. Now, if you happen to pick plants that were a very early crop and a very late crop, you could have blueberries on your vines all the way from June almost until September, or even into part of September. So the bloom times do overlap. So even if it's an early blueberry and it's a late variety blueberry, usually the blossoms will come out about the same time. So those of you that have very small areas or small landscapes, or you need to do your gardening in a container, there are several varieties that you can purchase. Some are called low bush, some are called rabbit eye, but the only one that really does well in our area is called half high. That's a cross between a northern blue bush and a native low bush. So if you're going to plant in a container, now I'm not saying you can't plant a large blueberry in a container. If you do want to plant a large blueberry in a container, it needs to be a container that's about as big as a half a whiskey barrel. You don't want one any smaller than that. If you choose a half-high variety, you can put it in a little bit smaller container. They don't yield as much. Like I said, a northern high bush will produce between 10 and 15 pounds of blueberries. The smaller ones, somewhere 1 to 7 pounds, depending on what variety you have. Okay, those of you that haven't planted your blueberries yet, you're probably thinking, I'm going to go buy my blueberries and I'm going to stick them in the ground now. That's kind of what us gardeners do. We get this idea and we want to do it right away. If at all possible, it's good to plan your blueberry plants ahead of time, a year ahead of time. We don't always do that, but it is a good idea. The most important thing for blueberries is the soil pH. How many of you brought soil samples in your blueberry fields today? Okay, good. So you're going to find out whether your pH was too high or too low. Blueberries are very picky about the pH in the soil. They really need a low acidic soil, somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5. Now, if you found out today that the soil is too high, that your pH is up there about 6 or 7, way too high for blueberries, you're going to have to lower that. We do that with elemental sulfur. Now, this picture here does say it's best to do it before you plant your blueberry. If you already have your blueberries in, you can lower the pH, but you've got to be very careful. It doesn't take very much sulfur, elemental sulfur, to lower the pH. And if you put too much on, it's going to lower it too much. And if you get much below 4, you're going to be in for a lot of trouble. So you're going to have to do it very slowly over a couple of years. Doug fir sawdust or Doug fir bark is the type of organic matter that you want to add to the soil before you plant your blueberries. You'll notice whenever we talk about putting plants in, we talk about adding organic materials. For blueberries, they want something that is a little bit acidic, which is what sawdust and fir is. So as that sawdust and fir breaks down, it will add a little bit of acidity to the soil, keep the pH in the range that you want it to be in. If possible, plant your blueberries in a raised bed or just a raised mound. Most of us, of course, have clay soil, which is a good thing, except we don't want those roots of the blueberries to have to try to get through that hard clay soil. So if you can amend your soil really nice with a lot of good sawdust or bark, and then mound it up a little bit, that blueberry will be very, very happy. Okay, when you go to plant your blueberries, what do you need to remember? Well, first of all, this is a berry. You're going to have to plant it in full sun. If you plant it in shade, they're going to try to get to the sun, and the berries you're not going to have very many berries on your bush, and they're not going to be very sweet. The more sun, the sweeter the berries are going to be, and that's true with any fruiting plant. You also don't want to plant near a lot of tall trees. The roots on tall trees go a long ways out, and blueberries, they don't like to compete. They don't like to compete for water or for roots or for anything else like that. So try to plant your blueberries in an area where you know you don't have a lot of large tree roots in that area. You're going to want to plant them somewhere between 4 and 5 feet apart. That's probably the best distance. OSU has done some studies to even at 2.5 feet apart, they still grow. So if you don't have a lot of room and you have to squish them a little closer together, that's okay. But if you have a little bit, it might be easier to get in there and prune around them if they're around 4 feet apart. Water your plants after you plant them. Oh, excuse me, I better back up here a minute. When you buy your plants, you're probably going to buy them in a container. The commercial people, they buy theirs bare root, but us homeowners, we will buy ours in a little container. So when you take it out of the container and you're putting it into the ground, don't plant it any deeper, or just barely a little bit deeper than it was in the container, all right? And then you're gonna put the plant in the ground, you're gonna put the mulch and the dirt back over it, you're gonna water it in really good. Now, blueberries, I don't know if I should tell you this now. I guess I can tell you this now. I do have it on another slide also. Blueberries, you can have one blueberry plant and it will have blueberries. They don't need another plant to cross-pollinate. But if you have more than one variety, then you will have not only more berries, but they'll be a little bit larger. So if you're thinking you're one of those people that can only have one plant, don't worry about it. You'll still get those blueberries. But if you have room for 2 or 3 or 4 or more plants, kind of figure out which ones you like the best and have a few of your favorite and maybe a couple more of your second favorite plant. Then after you get your blueberry planted, you're going to want to put mulch on top. Once again, we talk about fir, sawdust, or fir bark is the best to use. Don't use compost. I know that's a great organic material for your gardens and some of your other plants, but compost and manures have a very high pH, and that's not what our plants want. Plus, they also have high salt. They can have high salt, and blueberries is one of the plants that really doesn't like high salt content. So use the sawdust, use the fir to use as your organic material. What the mulch does is it helps suppress the weeds. Blueberries have very shallow root system. They do have a deep tap root, but they also have a lot of feather roots right up at the edge, right at the surface. So if you put that mulch on there, it's nice and it's fluffy, and those little roots really like that. So you're going to want to put mulch on. You're going to want to start out when your blueberries are new and maybe put about 2 inches of mulch. The next year, add it so you have 4 inches of mulch. And then the next year, you can add more so you have up to 6 inches of mulch. Don't put the mulch right at the very base of your plant, but you can put it around the other, the other area, and they'll really appreciate that. One thing about the sawdust that you need to remember is sawdust has a tendency when it gets wet to compact a little bit, and when you go to water it, you'll find your water kind of runs off. So every once in a while, just get in there with your fingers and fluff up the sawdust a little bit, just so the water will go down a little bit more. And that's one of the things that the sawdust is good for. It will help hold the water in after you water your plants. Also, the sawdust is good because of all those tiny roots that are really close to the surface. It'll keep them warmer in the winter, like we had this last winter, and it will also keep those roots cooler in the summertime. So putting mulch on your blueberries is a really good idea. And remember I told you that blueberries don't like competition. They don't like to compete for weeds either. Weeds take the nutrients, weeds take the water. So you got to be careful when you do weed because of those little roots that are at the surface. You're not going to want to get in there with a hoe, because if you do that, you're going to be grabbing those roots and ripping them. So use the mulch to suppress the weeds. And then if you do have any weeds or grasses growing around, use your hands and pull those out by hand so that you don't have to, so you're not disturbing those little roots very much. If you're using some type of woody herbicide in an area, be very careful around your blueberry plants. You're going to want new growth to come up from the bottom of your plant. And if you happen to be spraying any herbicides around there that for woody plants, those blueberries aren't going to be growing. So be very, very careful about your herbicides. All right, when you water, your blueberries need a lot of water. When they're young, they probably need about 1 inch of water a week during our non-rainy seasons, and as they're mature they could use anywhere from 1.5 to 3 inches of water. One thing people forget is when you're done with your blueberries and you've already harvested them, we kind of forget about our blueberry plants. We don't think about them too much anymore, and we might not be out there watering them as often as we really should, because the berry buds for the following year are put on the bush at the end of the season. So in August and September, that's when the blueberry bush is putting on all of the berry buds that are going to have those luscious berries next year. And if you forget to water them, you're not going to have as many. So it's very, very important that you continue watering those blueberries until we get our really, really solid fall rains, which could be October or maybe November. It's better, of course, for water at the base. The water will be going exactly where you want it to go. Soaker hoses are a wonderful idea, drip irrigation if that's the way you want to go. Some of us maybe can't use either one or don't use either one of those. And if you do have to overhead water with a sprinkler or you have to water by hand, that's okay. Blueberries don't get quite as many diseases from overhead watering as, say, tomatoes might. But just make sure that you water them early in the morning and that have a chance to dry out during the day. All right, as far as fertilizers go, blueberries only need nitrogen. They really don't need all the other minerals and nutrients that you find in fertilizer packages. So if you're going organic, the highest organic fertilizers would be either blood meal or feather meal. Feather meal is actually a little bit higher in nitrogen. And if you don't mind using a synthetic fertilizer, OSU recommends ammonium sulfate, because ammonium sulfate is an acidic fertilizer. So that will also help keep your pH at the right pH, the low pH, nice and acidity. One thing I want you to realize is that when you apply your fertilizer and how much fertilizer you apply depends on whether your plants are newly planted or whether they're an established plant. And that goes for any fruiting plant, goes for all your other berries too. The fertilizers are always different when they're brand new than they are after they've been in the ground. Your handout has a little bit of information about the amounts of fertilizer you would need to apply. Also, this publication, Growing Your Blueberries in Your Home Garden, also has a very detailed area that talks about what to do for your plants when they're brand new and what to do after they've been in the ground already. So I just wanted you to know, and you'll notice up here that it says for your new plants you would be fertilizing in late April, early June, and late July. But if your plants are mature, you're going to start in April, 1st of April, 1st of May, 1st of June. You don't want to do it any later than the middle of June, because if you do, you're going to put on a lot of growth late in the season, which is probably not going to be very good if we get an early frost. And then those nice new healthy, or I should say healthy, succulent growth will probably get damaged with our cold weather comes in. Fertilizer placement is important too because blueberries cannot translocate. That means if you put fertilizer only on one side of the blueberry plant, the branches on the other side would not grow. It does not go to all the roots. It only goes to those roots that the fertilizer is touching. So you need to make sure that you put your fertilizer in a circle and so that all the roots in that blueberry plant are getting the nutrients that they need. What you'll need to do is move your sawdust, your mulch away from the plant a little bit, about 18 inches from the crown. Put your fertilizer in a circle, water it in really good, and then put the mulch back on. Blueberries bloom usually in April. This year, it's hard telling when our blueberries are going to bloom. It might be a little bit later. And if we're having a very cold April when the blooms are out, our honeybees are not out there yet. They don't like the cold weather. They don't like the wet weather. But the mason bees, they don't mind. So if you are growing blueberries and you really are worried about them being pollinated, it's really a good idea to maybe have a couple of mason bee homes around your blueberry plants. And there's some articles and some displays back there about mason bees. Mason bees will come out earlier in the season and they'll do a really good job on your blueberry plants. Bumblebees also, you'll find, how many of you have been out there when your berries have been bloom and see how many bumblebees? The honeybees do pollinate, but the reason that the mason bees and the bumblebees do such a good job is because of the shape of the flower. The honeybees will go to the flowers of the blueberry, but they have a little harder time getting in that flower because of the shape. So I would really suggest you get some mason bee nests. Okay, 90% of the problems that you're going to have with your blueberries is going to be because the pH is too high. This picture shows a lime-induced iron deficiency, which means the pH is so high that the blueberry plant cannot use the iron that is in the soil. Yes. He can't use the iron that's in the soil, so it's not going to get that nutrient, and that's what causes the green to go out of your plant. So having the right pH is one of the most important things for having a healthy blueberry plant. There are a few disease problems with your blueberries. There's a couple of viruses. There's botrytis. We all probably will get a little bit of botrytis. It's also called gray mold. How many of you have seen your strawberries have a little bit of mold on them? That's botrytis. It's caused from wet springs, which is probably what we're going to have. So it's no problem, just cut it off. There's a couple of viruses, but most of the time they won't kill your plant. The scorch virus may damage your plant and you might not have one, but normally in the home garden we don't see this too often. What we do see is mummyberry. How many of you have had mummyberry where your blueberries, I see quite a few hands. Good. Not good, but good that I can tell you how to take care of this problem. Mummyberry is a fungus, and what happens is the blueberries get infected with this mummyberry. Instead of turning blue, they stay this kind of reddish color. And then they fall off onto the ground. Well, through the winter, they kind of mummify. And what happens next spring when the flowers are getting ready to bloom? The mummies that are down on the ground, they open up, they send up their fungal spores, and they reinfest your blueberries all over again. So there's a really easy cure for this, and that is, if you're going to put new mulch on your blueberries, do it in March. Do it this month. That way you're going to smother any mummies that happen to be left on the ground if you didn't pick them up last year, which is a good thing to do. Sanitation is very important. But put new mulch on. If you're not going to put new mulch on this year, 2 or 3 times this month, 2 or 3 times during the month of March, I want you to go through and fluff up the ground very carefully. What you're going to try to do is you're going to try to disturb those mummies. They're going to send up their fungal spores, but there's no blossoms there yet, so they won't infect the blossoms. So a very easy, so those of you that have it, try it, see if it works. There are not very many pests that the blueberries get. You might, when your blueberries are young and they're putting on a lot of succulent growth, you might get some aphids, maybe some scales or some leaf rollers. They never really are much of a problem except for this guy. How many of you have heard of the spotted winged Drosophila? A few of you have, okay. It is a fruit fly. You know what a fruit fly is. You forgot, left the banana on the counter and the fruit flies come. Well, this spotted winged Drosophila is a little bit different because she does not wait till your fruit rots before she decides to lay her egg inside of it. Her ovipositor has a saw-like shape to it. So as your nice little green blueberry is on your vine, she can actually saw into that blueberry, lay her egg inside, and as the blueberry is maturing, the egg will hatch out into its larval stage, which is a maggot, yes, and then the maggot will eat the inside of those berries. You'll know you have them for a couple reasons. When you go to pick a blueberry, it'll be squishy, and if you do open it up, you'll either see the maggots inside or you will see the eggs inside. This goes for most of all of our soft fruits, strawberries, raspberries, cherries. Soft fruits have a lot of problem with this. OSU and a lot of the other universities, the land-grant universities, are doing a lot of studies to see how they can get rid of this spotted winged Drosophila. It only came to our area around 2009, so it hasn't been around very long. But there's a lot of good information in here, and there's information on how to trap them. We have there's also a sample in the back room of a spotted winged Drosophila trap, and your handout, I believe, also has some information on it. This cup is filled with apple cider vinegar, and it has little holes around the top, so the fruit flies are attracted to that. They're also attracted to the color yellow. If you wanted to put a yellow sticky tag inside of your cup, you could, but you don't have to. There's a lot of information on the internet through the universities that you can look up to find out exactly the different types of traps you can make to catch these guys. Okay, pruning. That's people's most question. Two things we want to make sure that we do when we prune, and that is we want to promote new, strong wood, and we also want to maintain really good fruit production. It's kind of an experiment. It'll take you a few years experimenting with how you're pruning your blueberries to really get it down to a science. The first thing you need to do with anything when you're pruning is take out any dead, diseased, or dying pieces, all right? That's very easy. You also want to remove any growth, any stem that is shorter than your knee. That means it grew very late in the season last year, and they just aren't going to amount to anything. And there's no reason to have a branch on your blueberry if it's not going to produce any good berries. It's just going to be a waste of energy. So if they're short and they're below your knees, cut those off. Now, you're not going to need to do very much pruning on your blueberry bush until they're about 5, 6, 7 years old. We consider a mature bush somewhere between 6 and 8 years old. When they're younger than that, just maybe you might want to definitely cut out the dead parts of it, or if you have a branch that died or you want to form it a little bit better, that's okay. The other thing you do when your branches mature is you're going to take out 1 or 2 of the older canes. Blueberries grow best on 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-old wood. So you want to make sure, even though your blueberry bush will live to be 100 years old, it can, you want to keep it at 5 or 6 years old its whole life. So you're going to constantly cut out some of the older canes and let new canes grow back. The other thing you're going to do is take out the twiggy growth. We call it twiggy growth, and that is when you have a stem and it has little tiny short pieces on it. That's called twiggy growth. And you'll be able to look. If you go out there now, if you haven't pruned your blueberries yet and you look at them, you'll see that little twiggy growth. That part can come off because it's not very productive. I want you to know that the longer the branch that has the berry buds on the tip, the better the berries are going to be. So if you're out there and you're going to prune your blueberries and you're thinking, oh, which ones am I going to cut off? Cut off the shorter branches and leave the longer branches, all right? Also, you're going to thin out, you're going to do a little bit of the cutting on the inside because you want air circulation and you want the light to be able to come from the inside. We have a lot of predators out there, a lot of birds. You can try to keep them away. The only way you're really going to keep them away is to completely put them in an enclosed, netted area Otherwise, they're going to get in. Even if you put nets and throw them over your blueberry bushes, the birds are going to get underneath, and when you remove those nets to try to get to your berries, the berries are going to hook on them and go flying. So try what you can, but it might not always work. I would tell you to wait a few days after your blueberries get blue before you harvest them, unless you're having trouble with the spotted wing Drosophila. The earlier your blueberry, the earlier ripening blueberries won't have as many problems with this little fruit fly as your later ripening blueberries. So if you're having a little bit trouble, as soon as your blueberries turn blue, go ahead and harvest them. If you're not having any trouble, wait a little while because they will get sweeter. All right, this month, prune your blueberries if you haven't already done that. Fluff up the soil, puff up the mulch, apply more mulch if you need to. Set out your mason bees. Those of you that have mason bees that you put away in your refrigerators to keep them over the winter, it's time to put them out. And next month, if your blueberries are mature, that will be your first set of fertilizer applications.